Imagine sitting at the table with your parents, siblings, and relatives, everyone laughing, passing food, and celebrating together. Then suddenly, your brother stands up, clears his throat, and says something that makes the entire room go silent. This video presents a fictional story created purely for storytelling, entertainment, and documentary-style narration. All characters, names, events, locations, and situations shown in this video are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental and unintentional. Thanksgiving had always been the one day of the year when our entire family came together under the same roof. No matter how busy life became, everyone made time for it. My parents' house was the center of these gatherings, a large old home that smelled like cinnamon, roasted turkey, and freshly baked pies every November. The moment you walked through the front door, you could feel the warmth. Laughter echoed through the halls. Cousins ran around the living room, and the kitchen was always full of people trying to sneak a bite before dinner. That year felt the same at first. I arrived in the early afternoon just like I did every year. The air outside was cold, but the house felt warm and alive. My mom was already in the kitchen wearing her favorite red apron, moving quickly between the stove and the counter. Pots were bubbling, the oven was working overtime, and the smell of turkey filled the entire house. "Don't touch anything," she warned when she saw me reaching for a piece of bread. I laughed and hugged her anyway. Thanksgiving was her favorite holiday, and she treated the preparation like a sacred tradition. Every dish had to be perfect. The mashed potatoes had to be smooth, the gravy had to be rich, and the turkey had to be golden brown. My dad was in the dining room setting up the long wooden table. He was carefully placing plates and polishing the glasses like he was preparing for an important ceremony. Every year he insisted on using the same fancy plates that were kept locked away the rest of the time. "This table has to look right," he always said. Soon the house began to fill with people. My aunt arrived first, bringing 2 homemade pies and her loud voice that could be heard from across the street. Then my cousins came in, arguing about football and laughing as they dropped their coats on the couch. Within an hour, the house was full. Everyone talked at once. Someone turned on music in the living room. My uncle started telling one of his endless stories that he repeated every year, and everyone pretended it was the first time they were hearing it. But one person was missing: my brother Daniel. At first, no one seemed worried. Daniel was usually the most organized person in the family, but he had been busy lately with work. My mom assumed he was just running late. "He texted me earlier," she said casually while stirring the gravy. "He said he'd be here." So we continued with the usual Thanksgiving chaos. I helped bring drinks to the living room while the younger cousins played video games. My aunt was already asking everyone about their lives, and my uncle had started debating sports with my dad. The atmosphere was loud, warm, and comfortable. Then, about 30 minutes before dinner, the front door finally opened. Daniel stepped inside. Normally, when Daniel arrived somewhere, the energy in the room shifted in a good way. He had always been the confident one in our family, the one who made jokes, told stories, and somehow kept everyone entertained. But that day was different. He walked in quietly. He closed the door slowly behind him and stood there for a moment like he was collecting his thoughts. "Hey everyone," he said. His voice sounded normal, but something about him felt off. My mom walked over immediately and hugged him. "You're late," she said with a smile. "Traffic?" Daniel replied. But he didn't explain any further. I noticed his expression right away. His smile looked forced, and his eyes kept scanning the room like he was searching for something. Or maybe someone. He hugged a few relatives, shook hands with my uncle, and gave me a quick nod. But the usual excitement he brought with him wasn't there. Instead, he looked tense. Dinner was finally ready, and everyone moved toward the dining room. Plates were passed around, chairs scraped against the floor, and the long table slowly filled with people. The turkey was placed proudly in the center like it always was. My dad took his seat at the head of the table, something he had done every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember. My mom sat beside him, still checking the food to make sure everything looked perfect. Everyone began serving themselves. The usual conversation started again. Someone joked about eating too much. My cousins argued about which pie was the best. My aunt was already planning Christmas out loud. But Daniel barely spoke. He sat across from me, quietly moving food around his plate. At first I thought he just wasn't hungry, but then I noticed he kept looking up. Not at anyone in particular. Just around the table. His eyes moved from my dad to my mom to the rest of us. Like he was studying everyone. Like he was preparing for something. I leaned forward slightly. "You okay?" I asked him quietly. "Yeah," he said quickly. But his voice didn't sound convincing. He picked up his fork, took a small bite, then placed it back down again. It was strange seeing him like that. Daniel had always been the loud one at family dinners. The one who made sarcastic comments and teased everyone. Now he looked distracted, almost nervous. A few minutes later, my dad stood up, holding his glass. This was another Thanksgiving tradition. Every year before anyone could start eating properly, he made a short toast about family and gratitude. The room slowly became quiet. People raised their glasses and waited. My dad smiled as he looked around the table. "To family," he began. But before he could finish the rest of the speech, I saw something unexpected. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. Then he slowly stood up. The moment Daniel stood up, the quiet around the table became heavy. Everyone was already focused on my dad's Thanksgiving toast, so when my brother pushed his chair back and rose from his seat, it immediately drew every pair of eyes in the room toward him. For a second, I thought maybe he just needed to grab some from the kitchen or answer a phone call. But he stayed there, standing beside his chair, holding the edge of the table like he was steadying himself. My dad paused mid-sentence and looked at him with confusion. "Daniel," he said. "What are you doing?" Daniel cleared his throat softly. His eyes moved slowly around the table again, stopping on each person for just a moment. My mom, my aunt, my uncle, our cousins, and finally my dad. It felt like he was carefully measuring his words before he spoke. "I'd like to say something," he said. The room became even quieter. Normally, interruptions during my dad's toast never happened. It was one of those small traditions everyone respected without question. My dad lowered his glass slightly, his eyebrows pulling together in annoyance. "Can it wait?" he asked. "I'm in the middle of something." Daniel shook his head. "No, I think this is the right time." His voice wasn't loud, but there was something serious in it that made the room feel tense. My mom looked between the two of them, clearly unsure what was happening. "Well," my dad said with a small sigh, "go ahead then." Daniel took a slow breath before speaking again. "There's something everyone here deserves to know." My cousin let out a small laugh, thinking Daniel was about to make some kind of joke. But Daniel's face remained completely serious. "I've been holding on to something for a while," he continued, "and I can't keep pretending everything is normal." My aunt leaned forward slightly. "What are you talking about?" Daniel looked directly at my parents now. "This family is built on a lie." The words hit the table like a heavy weight. At first, no one reacted. It was as if our brains needed a moment to process what he had just said. My dad gave a short, "All right, that's enough drama," he said. "Sit down." But Daniel didn't move. "No," he said calmly. "Not this time." My mom's smile faded quickly. Her hands, which had been resting on the table near her plate, slowly tightened together. "Daniel," she said gently, "please sit down and eat." Daniel looked at her with a strange mix of sadness and determination. "I can't." He turned slightly so could face everyone at the table. "You all think you know our family," he said. "You think you know our history." No one spoke. "You think Dad is my father." The words hung in the air. Then Daniel finished the sentence. "But he's not." For a moment, it felt like the entire room had stopped breathing. My aunt blinked in confusion. My cousins exchanged nervous glances. My uncle looked back and forth between Daniel and my dad like he was waiting for someone to laugh and explain the joke. But no one laughed. My dad slowly set his glass down on the table. "That's not funny," he said firmly. Daniel's expression didn't change. "I'm not joking." My mom's face had turned pale. She looked like she had suddenly forgotten how to move. "Daniel," she whispered. "Please stop." But Daniel kept speaking. "A few months ago, I found some old documents in the filing cabinet in Mom's office," he said. "I wasn't looking for anything important. I was just helping clean up." My dad crossed his arms, his face growing harder with every second. And Daniel continued carefully. "I found a copy of my birth certificate." My cousin frowned. "So what?" Daniel looked down at the briefly before raising his eyes again. It was different from the one I've always known. Now the room was completely silent. "What do you mean different?" my uncle asked. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket slowly, like he had been preparing for this exact moment all day. The name listed as my father had been changed. My dad's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he shifted in his seat. "That's ridiculous," he said. Daniel ignored him and continued talking. "At first I thought it was some kind of paperwork mistake. But then I started asking questions. I started looking deeper." My mom shook her head quickly. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Daniel's voice softened slightly when he looked at her. "I needed to know the truth." My aunt spoke again, her voice full of disbelief. "So you're saying your birth certificate was changed?" Daniel nodded. "And that made me suspicious. So I did something else." He paused. "I took a DNA test." That sentence murmurs to ripple across the table. A few of my cousins leaned forward immediately. "A DNA test?" one of them asked. Daniel nodded again. "I sent it in about a month ago. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't sure what I'd find." My dad slammed his palm lightly on the table. "You're making a fool out of yourself?" he said. Daniel slowly reached into his jacket again. "This is the result." He placed a folded paper on the table. "I'm not biologically related to Dad." The room exploded with whispers and confused voices. My aunt gasped loudly. My uncle stared at my father. And my mom covered her mouth with her hand as tears filled her eyes. My dad didn't touch the paper. He simply stared at Daniel with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "That test is wrong," he said. Daniel shook his head. "It isn't." Then he looked directly at my mother. "You know it isn't." My mom's shoulders trembled slightly as everyone turned to look at her. The entire family was waiting for her to say Daniel was wrong. waiting for her to laugh and clear up the misunderstanding. But she didn't laugh. She didn't deny it. Instead, tears slowly rolled down her face as she whispered something none of us were prepared to hear. The moment my mother whispered that Dyer was telling the truth, the entire atmosphere of the room changed. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the house. Everyone stared at her in disbelief, waiting for her to take the words back or explain them in a different way. But she didn't. Her hands were shaking, and she looked down at the table like she couldn't face anyone. Daniel remained standing beside his chair, watching her carefully. His expression wasn't angry anymore. Instead, it looked tired, like he had been carrying this moment inside him for a long time. My dad leaned back slowly in his chair. His face had gone stiff, the way it did whenever he was trying to control his temper. "Explain," my uncle said quietly. No one else spoke. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on my mother. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and took a slow breath. "This happened a long time ago," she said softly. Her voice sounded fragile, like every word was difficult to push out. "Before I met your father, I was engaged to someone else." A wave of surprise passed through the room. My aunt looked completely shocked. "You were engaged?" she asked. "You never told anyone that." My mom nodded slowly. "His name was Robert," she said. The name felt strange coming out of her mouth, like it belonged to a completely different life. We met when we were both very young. We dated for years and eventually he proposed. At the time, I thought we would spend the rest of our lives together. Daniel listened silently while she spoke. "We were planning our future," she continued. "Talking about where we would live, what kind of family we wanted. Everything seemed perfect." My cousin leaned forward. "So what happened?" he asked. My mom looked down at her hands again. "One day he just disappeared." The confusion in the room deepened. "Disappeared." My aunt repeated. "He left town suddenly?" My mom explained. "No warning. No goodbye?" She swallowed hard before continuing. "I tried calling him for weeks. I went to his apartment, but he was gone. His phone number stopped working. No one seemed to know where he went." My uncle frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It didn't make sense to me either," my mom said. Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought maybe something bad had happened to him. I was scared and confused." She paused for a moment before adding quietly, "And then I found out I was pregnant." Several people at the table gasped softly. "You were pregnant with Daniel?" My mom nodded. "Yes." The room grew even more silent. "I didn't know what to do," she continued. "I was young, scared, and completely alone." She glanced briefly at my father, who remained completely still in his chair. "That's when I met your father," she said. My dad didn't react, but everyone else was watching him now. We started talking, and eventually we began dating. I told him about the situation. I told him everything. My uncle raised an eyebrow. "You told him the baby wasn't his?" My mom said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "He knew from the very beginning." Daniel finally spoke again. "So you both decided to pretend he was my father?" My mom closed her eyes for a moment before nodding. "Yes." The confession felt heavy in the room. My aunt leaned back in her chair slowly, clearly trying to process what she had just heard. "You kept this secret for over 25 years, she asked. My mom looked ashamed. "We thought it was the best thing to do," she said. "We wanted Daniel to grow up with a stable family." Daniel's voice was calm but direct. "That still doesn't explain what happened to Robert." The name hung in the air again. My mom hesitated. "I told you he disappeared." But Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. His voice was steady now. "He didn't disappear." The tension in the room instantly returned. Everyone turned toward him again. "What do you mean?" my uncle asked. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket slowly. "I started investigating after I got the DNA results," he explained. "At first I just wanted confirmation. But then I realized something didn't add up." He placed his hands on the table. "A man doesn't just vanish like that." My dad's jaw tightened slightly, so I started searching for him. My cousin looked surprised. "You mean online, everywhere?" Daniel replied. "Old records, public databases, even private investigators." "You hired a private investigator?" Daniel nodded. "I needed answers." My mom looked terrified now. "Daniel, please stop." But Daniel ignored the request. After weeks of searching, we finally found him. The entire table leaned forward slightly. "Robert Hayes," Daniel said. "That's his full name." My uncle whispered the name under his breath. "And where is he now?" he asked. Daniel paused for a moment before answering. "He's alive." The words sent another ripple of shock through the room. My mom's eyes widened. "That's impossible," she said quietly. Daniel slowly reached into his jacket again. "I thought so too." He pulled out a photograph and placed it in the center of the table. The picture showed a middle-aged man standing outside a small building, smiling at the camera. My mom stared at it like she had just seen a ghost. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the photo. "That's him," she whispered. My dad suddenly spoke again, his voice sharp. "This doesn't prove anything." Daniel didn't look away from him. "It proves he didn't disappear." He pointed at the photo. "He lives in another state now. He owns a small auto repair shop." The room felt tense enough to snap. My aunt looked confused. If he's alive, why didn't he come back? Daniel slowly looked around the table again before answering. That's the part none of you know. My mom's voice trembled. What part? Daniel leaned forward slightly. The reason he left wasn't his choice. My dad's expression darkened immediately. Daniel's next words came slowly. Someone made him leave. The moment Daniel said someone had made Robert leave, the tension in the room thickened instantly. It felt like the entire table had leaned closer without anyone realizing it. My mom was still staring at the photograph Daniel had placed on the table, her fingers hovering over it like she was afraid to touch it again. My dad sat stiffly in his chair, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. My uncle broke the silence first. What do you mean someone made him leave? He asked. Daniel looked at him briefly before answering. I mean, he didn't just disappear, Daniel said. He was forced out of town? My aunt frowned, clearly confused. Who would force him to leave? Daniel's eyes slowly moved toward my father. The room immediately grew uneasy. My dad noticed the look and let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced. Don't start pointing fingers, he said. You're making wild accusations now. Daniel didn't react to the comment. Instead, he calmly reached into his jacket again. It was clear he had come prepared for this moment. I spoke to Robert 2 weeks ago, Daniel said. My mom looked up sharply. You talked to him? Daniel nodded. At first he didn't want to speak with me, he explained. He seemed nervous, like he had spent years avoiding this conversation. My cousin leaned forward. So how did you convince him? Daniel shrugged slightly. I told him who I was. My aunt gasped softly. You told him you were his son? Yes. Everyone looked at my mom again, whose eyes were now filled with tears. She looked overwhelmed, like everything from her past had suddenly returned all at once. What did he say? My uncle asked. Daniel paused for a moment before answering. At first he thought it was some kind of joke, then I sent him my DNA results. And? My cousin asked. Daniel sighed quietly. He believed me. The room felt incredibly quiet again. My mom whispered nervously. What did he tell you? Daniel's expression became more serious. He told me he never wanted to leave. That sentence made several people exchange confused looks. What do you mean? My aunt asked. Daniel leaned his hands on the table. He said he loved Mom, Daniel explained. He said he was excited about the baby. He wanted to stay. My mom's face twisted with emotion. That can't be true, she whispered. He vanished without a word. Daniel shook his head slowly. That's what you were meant to believe. And my dad shifted in his seat again. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Daniel ignored him. Robert told me something else. He continued. The tension in the room rose again. What? My uncle asked. Daniel's eyes returned to my father. He said someone came to see him the night before he left town. My dad's expression hardened immediately. People talk to each other every day, he said sharply. That doesn't prove anything. Daniel reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a small folded document. This might. He placed the paper on the table beside the photograph. No one moved for a moment. Finally, my uncle picked it up and unfolded it carefully. His eyes moved slowly across the page as he read. What is it? My aunt asked. My uncle looked stunned. It's a bank transfer, he said. Daniel nodded. From 25 years ago, my dad leaned forward slightly. That could be anything, he said. My uncle looked back down at the document. It's a payment? He said slowly. A large one? Who sent it? My cousin asked. My uncle's eyes lifted from the page and moved toward my father. The silence that followed felt unbearable. My aunt looked confused. Wait, you're not saying. Daniel finished the sentence for her. The money came from Dad. My mom's face drained of color. That's not possible, she said weakly. Daniel pointed at the document. His signature is right there. My dad's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pushed himself upright. That doesn't mean what you think it means. He snapped. Daniel's voice remained calm. Robert told me everything. My dad stared at him with pure anger now. People lie. Daniel shook his head again. He said you came to see him late at night. Daniel continued. You told him Mom was pregnant. My mom looked like she had stopped breathing. And? My uncle asked carefully. Daniel's voice grew colder. You offered him money to leave? Gas filled the room. That's insane, my dad shouted. Daniel didn't raise his voice. You told him if he disappeared, Mom would never know the truth. My aunt covered her mouth in shock. You paid him to leave, she whispered. My dad looked around the table as if searching for someone to support him. This is all nonsense, he said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. He said you were desperate, Daniel continued. You told him you loved Mom and that you would raise the child as your own if he stayed away. My mom slowly turned toward my father. Tell me that isn't true, she said quietly. My dad didn't answer immediately. The room waited. My uncle held the document in his hand like it was evidence in a courtroom. Did you do it? He asked. My father's breathing had become heavier now. His eyes moved from Daniel to my mother and then around the table. I did what I had to do, he said finally. The words hit the room like an explosion. My mom's face collapsed in disbelief. You paid him to leave me, she whispered. My dad's voice lowered. I didn't want to lose you. My aunt shook her head in shock. You broke up two people who loved each other. My dad ran a hand through his hair. He was going to ruin everything, he said. Daniel stared at him without blinking. So you erased him from our lives. My father didn't deny it. Instead, he looked directly at Daniel and said quietly that he had only done it because he believed it was the only way to keep the family together. The moment my father admitted what he had done, the room fell into a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. No one knew what to say. For years we had all believed in the same version of our family story, and now that version had shattered in front of us. My mother sat frozen in her chair, staring at my father as if she were looking at a stranger. Her eyes were full of shock, pain, and disbelief. You lied to me for 25 years, she whispered. My father didn't respond right away. He looked down at the table, avoiding her eyes. I did what I thought was best, he said quietly. My aunt let out a breath of frustration. Best for who? She asked. You decided someone else's life without giving them a choice. My father rubbed his forehead like he suddenly felt the weight of everything. I loved her, he said, nodding toward my mother. I didn't want to lose her. My mother shook her head slowly. You took away my chance to decide my own life, she said. You took away his chance to be a father. Daniel was still standing beside the table, his hands resting lightly on the chair in front of him. His expression wasn't angry anymore. Instead, he looked strangely calm, like he had already accepted the truth before anyone else in the room. So that's it? My uncle said. You paid a man to disappear and hoped no one would ever find out. My father finally looked up again. I raised Daniel as my son, he said defensively. I gave him everything, a home and education, a family. You Daniel nodded slowly. You did raise me, he said. And I'm grateful for that. Everyone turned toward him, surprised by his tone. But that doesn't erase the truth, Daniel continued. My father's jaw tightened. What truth? That you built our family on a lie. The words hung in the air again. My cousins sat quietly, clearly unsure how to react. The younger ones looked confused, while the older ones seemed uncomfortable witnessing such a personal confrontation. My mother wiped the tears from her face, but more kept coming. Did you ever plan to tell me? She asked my father. He hesitated before answering. No. The honesty of that single word hurt more than the lie itself. My aunt leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. I can't believe this, she muttered. My uncle placed the bank document back on the table slowly. You should have trusted her enough to tell the truth, he said. My father looked exhausted now. I thought if the truth came out, everything would fall apart. Daniel let out a quiet breath. And now? No one answered that question. For a moment the room returned to complete silence. The turkey, the plates of food, the glasses on the table, all of it suddenly felt meaningless. The warm, happy Thanksgiving dinner we had started with felt like something that had happened days ago instead of minutes. My mother slowly picked up the photograph of Robert again. Her fingers trembled slightly as she studied the face in the picture. He's really alive, she said softly. Daniel nodded. Les, she looked up at him carefully. Did he ask about me? Daniel hesitated before answering. He did. What did you tell him? Daniel looked around the room briefly before speaking. I told him you deserve to know the truth. My mother closed her eyes for a moment. So he never stopped caring, she whispered. No, Daniel said quietly. He didn't. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly hating the direction the conversation was going. That was a long time ago, he said. My mom looked at him sharply. That doesn't make it disappear. The pain in her voice made the room even more uncomfortable. My aunt stood up slowly, grabbing her coat from the back of the chair. I think this dinner is over, she said. No one argued. One by one, people began standing up from the table. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as the family gathering slowly dissolved. Conversations that were normally loud and cheerful were now replaced with quiet whispers and uneasy glances. My cousins gathered their things and headed toward the door, clearly unsure what to say. My uncle placed a hand on my mother's shoulder gently before leaving. If you need anything, call me, he said. She nodded silently. Soon the house that had been full of laughter earlier that evening became strangely quiet. The plates of untouched food remained on the table, the turkey slowly cooling in the center. Daniel finally sat down in his chair for the first time since he had revealed the secret. My father remained where he was, staring at the table. You didn't have to do this tonight, he said quietly. Daniel looked at him. Yes, I did. My father shook his head. You've destroyed this family. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the empty dining room. I didn't destroy it, he said calmly. The truth did. My mother slowly stood up from her chair and walked toward the living room without saying another word. Her steps were slow, like she was still trying to process everything that had happened. My father watched her leave, but didn't follow. For the first time in my life, I saw him look uncertain. Not angry, not confident, just uncertain. Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked down at the photograph still lying on the table. The man in the picture? His real falling in front of a small auto repair shop hundreds of miles away. A man who had been erased from our lives decades earlier. Now the truth had brought him back into the story, and nothing about our family would ever feel the same again. Thank you for watching this story until the end. Sometimes the truth we hide for years can change everything in just a few minutes. One secret, one confession, and an entire family can see each other differently forever. But now I want to hear from you. Do you think Daniel did the right thing by revealing the truth at the Thanksgiving dinner, or should he have kept the secret to protect the family? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your opinion matters. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more intense family drama, shocking secrets, and powerful revenge stories, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.